All right, well, I think that's 1 o'clock. We'll get this started. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Selwyn District Plan Review Hearing number 17 for Noise. My name is Andrew Willis, and I'm an Independent Hearings Commissioner based here in Christchurch. And I'll now ask the rest of the panel to introduce themselves, starting on my left.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Alexander. I'm an accredited commissioner and a Selwyn District Councillor.
And we also have Rob on the screen in case you can't see him from your angle. So Rob, if you wish to introduce yourself.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Rob Van Voorthausen, Independent Hearings Commissioner, temporarily stuck in Napier.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So if I can just get the staff members to introduce themselves as well to those present. So potentially starting with Ms. Barker. Right, so maybe Justine or Grace, if one of you could do the health and safety briefing, and I guess we can add the bit around the masks as well in terms of protocol for that. Great, thanks, Justine. So to the Section 42A team, is there anything you want to bring to our attention at this stage before we hear from the submitters? No? Okay. So I understand from the schedule that we're hearing from Mr. Nicol first. You are here? Great. Well, welcome. Please come up to the table. Thank you. And thank you for providing your written submission on the plan. And also, you've provided the statement as well that you've handed out to us as panel. Is that correct? Yes. Transcript? Yes. Great. Thank you. So we have read that, and a copy's been provided to Rob as well, who's not obviously in the room today. So we have read it just now, but look, you're welcome to provide us with any sort of highlights from that, or reaffirm or state any matters that you want to bring to our attention. Over to you. Thank you. Can you push the microphone button, please? Thank you.
Right hand button.
The right hand button.
Yeah, so I'm representing myself and my wife Jenny and Sally Gardner, and we're addressing DPR 0261 and 0264. We've been residents of West Milton since 1973 when we built a house in Bells Road, and even at that stage we were fully aware of the Defence Force activity in the rifle range. 30 years ago, we moved to our present property on the Old West Coast Road, which is a direct neighbour of the rifle range. So we've had an intimate relationship with them over the last 30 years. Over most of that time, there's been relatively few occasions when you might have considered or we did consider that the activity of the army was producing unacceptable noise. But recently, in the last 4 years, there's been a significant escalation in the activities on the range and the unacceptable noise associated, unreasonable noise associated with that. And I've given some examples of that in my transcript. One very difficult occasion was low-flying helicopters in plural, very close to the boundary, landing and taking off again, and soldiers getting in and out, and buzzing, a lot of buzzing, and that actually continued over outside of daylight hours. There's another occasion in summer of 2021 when there was a lot of tank activity on the range, which really hadn't been much over the years at all. And this is it was exacerbated by the fact that the ECAN now has a secondary stock bank to protect the district from the 9,990-year flood. So it's about 3 meters high off the ground. And the army is using that as a thoroughfare now for vehicles and the tanks and soldiers firing off the top of the bank back into the range. So that's increased not only increased the activity, but it's increased the unreasonable noise associated with that activity. And I've pointed out that our livestock, for instance, habituate to low noise very easily, and it doesn't interrupt their behavior. But the sudden appearance of a noisy tank does create flight sensations from them. So it's got worse in net effect. And we're concerned that within the proposed district plan, that there's nothing which gives us and the community some assurance as to that there won't be increasing escalation of the army's activities on the range. And we submit that there really needs to be a noise management plan associated with the designation as a condition of the designation that the army has for the range. Because without that, we've got no assurance whatsoever that things aren't going to increase. And also the army hasn't got the opportunity really to be seen as a good neighbour without something that determines what they can do and what they can't do. The army, in their response, claimed that adding a condition to their designation was outside the scope of the district plan. We're not quite sure if that's the case or not. If that's legally correct, then we're suggesting that the least they could do is have a gentleman's agreement between themselves and district council as to what the conditions they're going to operate under. And that would give everybody some peace of mind, and it would also provide a document which identified what they were going to do or what they weren't going to do. That has existed unofficially since 2009 when there was a problem until the present day, but there's no guarantee that will continue under the new plan whatsoever. So we submit that the the designation of the Army should have a condition which includes a noise management plan. The second point a second part in our condition is, it doesn't relate to the Army, it relates to the Selwyn District Council's overlay, noise overlay around the Army. They've drawn two circles around the Army, a 65 decibel range and a 55 decibel range. And the activity status is very different between the two. Within the 55 decibel range, a new dwelling is permitted, albeit with requirements for acoustic attenuation to meet the standards. Across this line, a few meters across this line, the activity status changes to non-complying. And that's pretty harsh to move just a little shift like that to such a big change. And we're suggesting that restricted discretionary activity status would be more appropriate. We think that would suit the Army, because they would be sure that anybody who was making an application was fully aware of what they did and was applying within that. The council would have the ability to determine where the building was and that it met the standards for internal noise, and the applicant would have surety that there would be an outcome. The problem that we see with the non-complying resource consent is that there's no surety for the owner of the title. It increases the costs and time and money for both the applicant and the council, and it will significantly depreciate the value of any land that is in that category. In fact, it might make it worthless. It's never been tested, of course. So our submission then is that it would be perfectly adequate for everybody for all parties, if a restricted discretionary activity applied to the 65 decibel zone rather than a non-complying resource consent. So those are the two significant parts of our submission. Thank you.
Well, thank you for providing that statement, and also thank you for providing this as well. That's extremely helpful for a sort of a succinct summary of your position and comments. I'll just ask over to the panel members now if they have any questions of you, starting with Commissioner Alexander.
Thank you. And hello, Alistair. You're asking for a restricted discretionary rather than a non-complying within the 65 dB contour.
Correct.
What issues do you think that discretion should be restricted to? Normally when a condition is restricted discretionary, it says what the areas of discretion are. Do you have any idea of what you might think would be a reasonable set of discretionary conditions?
Well, the main one I would think would be to meet rather more strict acoustic requirements than you need in the 55 decibel range, and those can be justified by acoustic engineer who is involved in the architecture or the design of any or alteration, for that matter, to any building. So that would be the first thing I would think. Maybe there could be some discretionary, some consideration about the siting of the buildings, perhaps. But I think those could be established and discussed and agreed upon, so that it made a restricted discretionary activity sort of made sense.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. You've actually answered a question that I had for you in this document here, but I just wanted to pick up, so this voluntary agreement between the council and Selwyn, the New Zealand Defence Force, and being good neighbours, did they inform you of these activities that have, exacerbated the noise since 2020. Did they tell you about that those activities would take place?
They as part of this voluntary agreement, which was set up in 2009 after a bad incident, they advertise in the press, and if you're on their email list, they email you details of when the activity will be taking place, the days it will be taking place, and which army personnel or police personnel, or whoever it might be, who will be involved. It doesn't, that advertisement or indication to you doesn't go into enough detail. In other words, they wouldn't have had in the advert, there will be a lot of low-flying helicopters.
No.
Right. So it's an advice that they're going to be operating and it's occurring, but it's not sufficient detail for you to know exactly what's going to happen.
Okay. And then I picked up on your comment about shooting around a playground or in a neighbouring, where a playground was in a neighbouring area.
Not quite. Some of the current dwellings are close to the army boundary. They've been built under the current regulations. So the children playing in their garden, for example, are right next to the army. And previously, before the stop bank was there, all the army activity was further out in the range. It's since the stop bank's been there that they found it very convenient to use it as an access, and therefore everything's come closer, and therefore those kids are not at risk. I mean, all the shooting is going out into the range, but it's kind of frightening if kids are playing there and soldiers pop up on the less than 100 meters away on this 3-meter high stop bank and start firing.
Have any of those households that contain children, have they complained?
Yeah.
They have.
Complained?
Yeah.
No, but I've been part of the submission.
Okay.
And the submission 264 is one of those.
And just on your last point on page 1, where you could find no reference to where about the gentleman's agreement, about the council not being able to add conditions to the designation. I found it. It's at paragraph 27.10 in the section 42A report.
27.10, which I won't have with me. Could you just repeat that for me?
So it says, hang on, I know it's 27.10, hang on. The council is unable to impose noise and vibration limits or other conditions on the operations within the range, given the existing designation.
Yeah. Why is that?
Well, because I mean,
the army dismissed it by saying it was outside the scope of the council's future proposed plan.
Well, I'm not. I think that's quite right. We're here to hear the review of the district plan, not to review the designation. So that's all from me.
Well, in that case, we've got the fallback position is this agreement that exists between the army and the council that everybody knows about the written conditions under which they're going to operate as a gentleman's agreement, which has existed since 2009 to now, but there's no provision that I can see in the proposed plan that would continue or be revised or whatever.
But in any case, that is covered in the officer's report at paragraph 27.10. Yeah, so thank you. I'll just see Commissioner Van Vorst, do you have any questions?
Thanks, Andrew. No questions for Mr. Nicole, but to the officers, I'd be interested tomorrow to ask the New Zealand Defence Force about the alleged use of their stop bank for driving tanks and shooting from. So in preparation for that, could you please print off this afternoon or first thing tomorrow an aerial photograph of the designation with the noise boundaries and just mark on there with a felt pen or something where the secondary stock bank is, so I can just orient myself when I address this issue with the Defence Force tomorrow. Thank you.
I'll do that. Can I also add that my understanding is, as part of the designations, that the Defence Force are seeking to roll over their designation as it exists at the moment with no conditions. So that's what I'm meaning there. But I will also check with the council officer dealing with designations just to double check where everything's up to with that process as well.
Yep, that'd be helpful.
I do understand that other Defence Force establishments do have conditions on their designation.
Right. Well, look, I've just got a few questions as well. So just wondering, have you seen the evidence from the New Zealand Defence Force, in particular Major Challies, around the range standing orders that they apply? Are you aware of those? That sets out their process, I think, and also how they manage their activities on site.
I don't think we've ever been party to that.
Okay. Right. So they do cover that in their evidence. It's probably worthwhile having a look at that. And I was just, if you had seen it, I was interested in whether you had any comment on that. But if you haven't looked at it, then I guess you won't have.
No, I must admit not to have seen that.
Okay. So in terms of the non-complying versus restricted discretionary activity status and the ability to develop in that sort of 65 dp overlay, is the issue building on the 8 to 10 titles with no dwellings, or is the issue rebuilding on your existing sites that already have a house, or is the issue about maybe seeking additional development in those areas? What is it? Is it
All of the above.
all of the above? Okay.
Because the non-compliant activity is dwellings or alterations to existing dwellings.
Thank you. So is your concern new buildings, but also additions?
Yes.
Yes. Just wanted to clarify that. So it's both those two components.
Yes.
Yes.
Or a rebuild, for instance, if you lost your house in a fire, it would be the same.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for your summary statements.
Thank you.
So we have next Kelly Ramsey. So welcome.
Hello.
As before, and we've read the written submission, but so you don't need to read that out to us. But if you're willing to, or feel you need to, then we're happy to have points of clarification, and also for you to identify and speak to us about those key points and comments that you wish to make to us today. And then after that, we'll do a round of questions if there are any. So thank you.
Sure. I thought I'd just actually read out probably a summary of that and just some more feelings since I did that, because it was a wee while ago since we did those submissions, etc. So hopefully this goes okay. Hello everyone. My name is Kelly Ramsey, and my husband and my 2 children are members of the West Mountain community, and we've lived in our property in Bells Road, West Mountain, for approximately 7.5 years. Sorry, I'm really nervous. I'm not very good at public speaking. However, I felt when this issue arose, I had no option but to speak up and hold on. But to speak up today, because the decisions that you make today might affect my family, my property, and the West Mountain community. I would like to make it very clear that my recommendation to this panel and part of my submission to the Selwyn District Council is that common sense prevail, and that the NZDF proposal put before the Selwyn District Council was declined, and the current status quo remains as it is today for the 150 homes subject to the hearing today. West Mountain was first settled in 1970s and the 1870s, and has grown significantly with the addition of a number of large housing developments. West Mountain has had a long, well-established association with horse riding, sheep, beef, and arable farming. And more recently, this has been expanded to wine growing, deer farming, and specialist crops such as walnuts and truffles. West Mountain is a very family-focused community, ideally situated to participate in large varieties of outdoor pursuits, including skiing, horse riding, off-roading, dirt biking, mountain biking, fishing, clay shooting, paintballing and airsoft, learning to fly, and jet boating, to just name a few. The median age in West Melton is 39.7 years. The population of West Melton has significantly grown in recent years, from just 327 residences in 2006 to 2,420 households as at the 30th of June 2021. It is projected that West Melton will see further growth by potentially an additional 1,300 households in the next 20 years. Our community is thriving. The West Melton School was established in 1871, and since then the rollout has bloomed to over 400. The school roll has bloomed to over 456 students as at November 2021. There's now approximately 86 different bus routes which transport the community to other parts of the Selwyn district and the Christchurch district from the school to workplaces. The Selwyn District Council and ECANS have invested a considerable amount of money and time into development of the new community centre and sports centre, the skate park, the centre of West Melton, as well as recreational parks such as the Willows, Whedon's Forest, West Melton Forest and Hall Road facilities that are all within close proximity of the West Melton Rifle Range. These recreational parks are made up of hundreds of acres of land that attract locals and people from all over Canterbury to hike, picnic, mountain bike, trail ride and dirt bikes, horse riding and simply bring the dog out for a good run. What could the potential impacts be to the West Melton community and these areas if the proposed changes that NZDF would like to make to be incorporated into the district plan go ahead? We could add building restrictions in this area and additional consents along with noise control building materials to the 150 homes involved, which I don't agree with, but that will not reduce the impact that and any increase in activities or noise by the NZDF at the West Melton Rifle Range will have on these recreational areas. We moved to our property 7.5 years ago, knowing fully that the proximity of the West Melton Rifle Range to our home and that there would be a certain amount of noise and activity at the site. To date, we have never laid a formal complaint about any of the activities and that have taken place there. We knew that the West Melton Rifle Range was established in the 1940s, and we especially appreciated the work that NZDF did for the wider Canterbury community during the Christchurch earthquakes. We often saw military personnel hiking from Burnett Military Camp to the West Melton Rifle Range in full kit carrying firearms, and when everyone was on heightened alert after the Christchurch terror attacks, the NZ Defence Force was very good in communicating to the community when those exercises would be held as to not raise any unnecessary or further concerns or anxiety. My question to NZDF would be, have they considered the impacts of their proposal to amend the district plan and future planned activities to the rifle range will have on the individual homeowners or the West Melton community? And if a request was made today to put the rifle range in West Melton community as it stands, would this still be approved? The NZ Defence Force Director of Environmental Services, Rob Lowe, has commented publicly that NZDF have no plans to significantly increase shooting activity at the rifle range, therefore no plans to increase noise generated. So why are the NZDF actively proposing such a radical change to silence the West Melton community? If what I have been advised is correct, over the last 12 years since 2009, there have only been 2 noise complaints as a result of the rifle range activity. So why is NZDF requesting this change now? Rob Owen has said that the NZDF strives to be a good neighbour to everyone living in the community and in the vicinity of their camps, bases and training facilities. And up until recently, I would have 100% agreed with that statement. I would have appreciated the NZDF reaching out to the West Melton community to discuss any proposed changes that could have affected households in the area instead of the actions they have taken in this stance. They have in the past, so why has this changed now? My biggest concern is that NZDF haven't been transparent in the reasoning for their requested changes with the no complaints compliance to 150 homes, that the NZDF is considering closure of other military bases, increasing activity at West Mountain Rifle Range, and potentially introducing weaponry that has not been used on the site before. Weaponry that could have a significant higher impact on noise levels and safety in our community. Our property is our home. My husband and I have worked very hard and saved money for 10 years to be able to afford our dream home in the country. We wanted to raise our children in a nurturing community, attending a country school and having access to activities such as riding motorbikes, ponies, and raising livestock, and an opportunity that we never had growing up. We have found that in West Melton, a long-term goal was to improve the property as part of our retirement plan, and over the years we have applied for the relevant building consents with the Selwyn District Council to invest money in our property by adding value and additions and enhancements. Proposed changes to the district plan by the NZDF now threaten that plan. We now have the potential for additional restrictions on our land, which could have financial impacts for us now and in the future. I understand that the Selwyn District Council and this panel takes changes to the district plan under serious consideration when they're making the decisions regarding this hearing. But I wanted to attend today so you learn and see the people affected by the decision you make, and that you understand our concerns and the impacts your decisions will have on my family and my future. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you for that statement, setting out your comments and concerns. I'll just see if there's any questions. No questions? No questions? Commissioner Van Voorsthuizen, questions?
Yes, Mr. Ramsey, hopefully you can hear me okay. Your actual submission, you sought the deletion of Policy 4, Rule 7 and the noise control boundaries relating to the West Melton Rifle Range, which would leave then a void of provisions to manage the issues arising from that. But I take it from your presentation today, your main concern seems to be regarding NZDF's request for a no complaints covenant to be placed in the plan. Would I be correct in that assumption?
That is one of my main concerns, that's correct. And it has been a long time since we did the original submission, so that's why I wanted to probably do more of a statement and to make sure that you see the face behind the statement.
Yep, no, we appreciate that. And you mentioned in your presentation additional restrictions that the New Zealand Defence Force was seeking. Can you just remind me, or when you wrote that, what did you have in mind? What restrictions were you referring to?
The restrictions I'm talking about are the potential building restrictions for being located in that zone. So, for example, we have recently applied for 2 applications to build a garage on our property. When we moved into our property, it was just mainly the house that actually used to be a workshop, and we have gradually started work on renovations. We've got 2 consents in at the moment. One recently has been passed and the other one is underway at the moment. But there are other things that we would like to do to the property, and what we're concerned about is that if these changes come through, we may not be able to do that anymore, or we risk actually losing a significant amount of money that we have invested in the property if the property is then valued at considerably less than its value now, or worthless, as one of the previous submitters said.
All right, and can you just remind me, sorry, I can't recall, are you located within the 65 dB noise boundary or the 55 dB noise boundary?
65, we're on Bells Road.
Yeah, okay. All right, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. No questions from me. So just looking next on our list, I understand we are expecting to hear from Lindsay Halliday. Welcome, come on up. Just for that last one, are you able to provide that statement that you've read out to us? Can you give us a copy of that, please? You can provide it to council staff so we can get that logged in. Thank you. So, Mr. Halliday, welcome. Have you prepared a statement as well? Are you able to provide that as well at the end of this?
Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Lindsay Halliday, and I have a qualification with Bachelor of Engineering with Honours and a Master of Science in Resource Management. I have prepared a a presentation. And unfortunately, when I was doing it, I did the normal engineering thing of sort of disappearing down rabbit holes, trying to find out more and more until I finished it last night at midnight, and it's now with a presenter here. So I apologise for not getting it to you sooner, but yeah, it's there. And I guess my position is that I submitted a written submission earlier on, and I really just want to stand by that and give some background to it verbally, because all of my submissions were opposed by the NZDF and rejected by the SDC, but I thought I really needed to speak up for them, because I still think, you know, that they're actually valid. So anyway, that's why I'm here. So how would you like us to proceed? Can I show some of the slides, or is
Yes,
that going
yes,
to
you're
take too
welcome.
long?
You're welcome to show that to us.
Because I won't show them all, because I guess that might take too long. But my three main points really were, if we can have a look at the next slide, please. Yes, that one there. So I just had three submission points really. One was that really I felt that the information really needed more like international perspective in terms of what could be achieved with noise mitigation at rifle ranges and that sort of approach. The second one was to actually review the noise mitigation at the West Melton Rifle Range and consider options for improvement. And then the third one was to look at the ambient conditions. What personal experience was that on a cloudy day or an overcast day, the noise was a whole lot louder. And to the extent that you think, you know, what's going on here seemed to be quite an important observation. So I thought, you know, let's see if perhaps the Army could alter their schedules when this thing was happening, because it can be predicted. So those were the three points that I put in and were rejected. But then the next slide, please. Really, so what I felt was, here's the slide showing the actual noise boundaries when Malcolm Hunt Associates did a report that was actually acted upon by them to actually work out how temporary military training exercises should be carried out all around New Zealand. So that this particular piece of information features in a lot of updates and plans and so on. So go to the next slide, please, if we can get it. And this was the updated actual noise contour profiles from Tonkin and Taylor. And so what it shows is massive increases in area for the noise control boundaries. And that's made evident if we look at the next slide, which is actually puts the Malcolm Hunt noise profiles on the same map as the Tonkin and Taylor. So what's clear there is that 55 line that I've put in there with a squiggly mouse, 55, the yellow, bold yellow line there, and the updated plan is actually sitting on top of what the new 65 dB line is sitting on. So I sort of thought, what's going on here? This is quite a different picture. And of course, the 55 dB line is shifted from halfway down Melton Grange Road right out to nearly Halkett Road. So at that stage, I thought, well, what's happening here? Because looking at the huge extra number of people who are affected by moving that 55 line out to nearly Halkett Road, it's hundreds of people, right? So that needs pretty serious rationale about why you would do that. And the answer to that is easy. The answer is that these are just models. So we've got a new model and it shifted the line because you've got a new model with different assumptions and the model just bears out the assumptions and the model. So that's why it's there. But of course, consequences, we've got all these increased numbers of people affected because of a line on a map. So I guess the upshot of that is that we need to be very careful about actually, imposing perhaps unnecessarily extra conditions on the people living there. So just that sort of a change. So that was, I guess, my first point to try to understand this and to make sure that this is correct, because it's got quite serious implications. So, and as part of that, I felt, well, we've got the rifle range and it's operating. It's just the obvious thing to do would be to carry out a sensitivity analysis and actually put what they're currently doing on the map. And actually, once you've got a model, this is dead easy to do. You've got a model and you put inputs of activity. So how many shots you do, how many grenades you launch and so on. That goes into the model and that can go on the map. So what I suggest is that should have been done as part of sort of the explanation to the people, about what's happening here, because it's difficult to understand what's going on, right? So let's try to make it easy for people to understand what's going on, and in particular, what the current practice is. So I suggest that should have been done as part of an explanatory type approach to people. Let's try to explain what's happening, make it easy for people to understand. So that's an observation. I think, why haven't we done that? And so that's still a suggestion, and that comes up in the final recommendation I make about something to do with that. And as part of the Tonkin and Taylor update report, part of that was that they wanted to look at how what we're doing here in this planning process compares with international best practice. And I thought that's a good idea. But when I look in the chapter in the Tonkin and Taylor report headed international experience, the experience limited to 2 countries, UK, USA. Why would you limit it to 2 countries? What about the rest of the world? Have they got anything to actually offer in terms of their experience? I believe so. So therefore, I actually said, well, they haven't done it. Let me have a look. So let's have a look, a couple of slides on. Next one, please. So here, for example, is what they do in Australia, the EPA Victoria. This is the approach they use. It's quite different. They don't use an approach that actually says people can take a certain dose of sound and this is going to be fine. What they say is we're actually going to measure how much sound is experienced at the closest house to the rifle range. And this table here, the table there, actually reflects what sound level you expect to receive closest to the rifle range as a maximum. So I won't go into the detail of that because it's there, and this is how they do it in the EPA Victoria. The argument probably would be, well, it only applies to like non-military rifle ranges and so on. But knowing the Australians, they're pretty good at actually managing stuff like this. And I'd actually hazard a guess that this sort of approach would probably apply if a military rifle range was near a town or so on. So that's one study. And looking at other international experience, the next slide actually looks at what the Germans have found when they study noise from military rifle ranges, right? So here's a study that's hot off the press, 2021, just presented in Washington last year. And what it shows is that the previous study had been done in 1986. And in 1986, they found that noise from military rifle ranges, the loudness of the noise was a good predictor of annoyance. But over the years, with the Cold War has gone and different perspectives that people are now having on noise from rifle ranges, they found that that was no longer the case. That what they found was it was important to consider non-acoustical and in particular attitudinal factors for the prediction of noise annoyance. As I say, this was a change from the previous 1986 study, which found that noise annoyance was best predicted by noise exposure. With the updated research, the most influential factors turned out to be the attitudes towards the local military training area and the German armed forces in general. The more positive the attitudes were, the less annoyed by shooting noise were the residents. So this is something that is hot off the press, last year's research, something that is probably relevant to our situation. If we have an army that upsets people, and they're probably going to have a stronger level of annoyance. And the next slide, please, is now here's the noise management from the happiest country in the world. 4 years in a row, United Nations has shown Finland to be the happiest country in the world. So what do the happiest country, how do they manage military range noise? Here's a chart, a table from up-to-date work by the Finnish military, actually. This is published by the Finnish military. And here's a chart which shows the management based on noise level in the environment around the rifle range, the number of people experiencing the noise, and what they might do about it. So, for example, I've got a red ring there. If the noise level is in 65 to 70 decibels, into the chart on the left, and come across to the right, come down from the vertical there. If there's more than 10 people actually exposed to this level of noise, we then say it's in the orange zone. Orange zone says, situation unacceptable. Extensive noise control measures are required. So might that be applied to the 65 decibel limits around the West Melton Rifle Range? Well, if you're in Finland, they'd say we've got to do something about it. What they don't do is make it an externality. Let's make the neighbours actually cope with it and alter their houses or whatever they have to do. So here's a country that actually says we'll actually alter our rifle ranges to provide a better environment for our neighbours. Really, that might be one of the reasons why Finland's the happiest country in the world. Anyway, so that's the Finnish guidance. So I felt that it was worth just reviewing what's happening in the rest of the world. That us, New Zealand, with our noise dose response type approach, it's probably outmoded. I think the UK and the US experience from 1995 or whatever. I think it's time to move on, perhaps, looking at international experience. So anyway, that's got that off my chest. So I felt that we hadn't actually done our homework. If we're going to say let's look at international experience, let's look at it properly and not just cherry pick. Let's say UK, USA. So I've got that off my chest. The other actual submission points I had was let's have a look at the effect of ambient conditions on noise and vibration from the range. Try to get a handle on my perspective that under certain conditions the noise was a lot louder. And so I've got a slide to do with that. Can we move on? Next one, please. Yeah, so this is the ambient conditions one. So So first of all, it's well known that ambient conditions do actually affect the focusing of noise locally. So if you've got temperature inversion, cloud cover, what tends to happen is the noise becomes louder in the local environment because it can't go up to the sky, it gets reflected back to the local environment. So, and that's actually acknowledged, the reference there is the first reference from the US Army Corps of Engineers, saying that temperature inversions and wind velocity gradients will focus sound waves back towards the ground. And for impulse noise, they recommended that monitoring of atmospheric conditions should be conducted so that training schedules can be modified accordingly. That's out of an American Army Corps of Engineers report. And secondly, I found out doing some literature work that there was actually a newspaper report from Colonel Phil McKee, published in the Christchurch Press on the 18th of August 2011. The statement related to concerns from local residents about the use of charge directional fragmentation devices, more commonly referred to as claymores. He said, "We've learned a lot about our environment over the years. We know that weather patterns causing ground temperature inversion can have a significant effect on the level of sound that resonates from the range." And this is from Colonel Phil McKee in the newspaper 2011. So, and then it goes on to say he had carried out a review of using claymores at the West Melton Rifle Range, and with the exception of extreme circumstances that will require command sign off before it goes ahead, New Zealand Army will no longer be using claymores at the range effective immediately. It shows that we are committed to being responsible, considerate neighbours. So that's very good. And so Section 42 report says in recommending rejection of my submission, where actually suggested they should be doing that. They were already doing that, but they actually opposed my submission. So why would they oppose my submission if they were already doing it? Anyway, that's what I couldn't really understand that. Yeah, and so the Section 42A report, in recommending rejection of this submission point, it said on-site mitigation and the ambient noise conditions were factored into the noise modelling. Okay, well, that's no real help when we're talking about actions, you know, when the weather conditions are adverse. So what I was thinking then was, well, if the actual ambient conditions were factored into the modelling, how was it actually achieved? Was it actually by real world weather data being put into the model, which really you would have to do to get accurate modelling, right? You wouldn't just add a fudge factor to say we're allowing for ambient conditions by putting X onto the modelling. Presumably real weather data would have been used to make the model real. So that's the sort of thing that'd be worth checking whether they've actually done it with respect to the real world weather, or whether that modelling, which includes the ambient temperature inversion effects, how was that actually achieved? So that was my point about ambient conditions. And then the only other point really was I felt that we should actually review the actual facilities at the West Melton Rifle Range, whether they could be improved. And now with retrospect, you know, maybe improved along Finnish advice lines. The Finnish Defence Force have done a lot of work on improving facilities at rifle ranges. Maybe we could have a look at what they do. Could be relevant. So that submissions were rejected as well. So came out of it with nothing. So my conclusion then was that current international best practice for managing military rifle ranges has not been adequately reviewed by the NZDF and its consultants. A review of current experience in Australia, Germany, and Finland has shown that a simple dose response model for management of noise from military rifle ranges is outmoded. So annoyance caused by noise from military rifle range activities is not a simple function of loudness of the noise, but it does include attitudinal factors, as the German study found. And then the best practice approach from Finland really should be acknowledged and taken into account, I think. So my recommendation, I'd say that while the NZDF has a right to continue its operations at West Melton Rifle Range, I've got no problem with that. I believe that some obligations should be put in place to justify the right. We've heard very, very little from the NZDF regarding any obligations on their part. So to me, that means that any obligations need to be quite prescriptive. So what I was thinking, a suitable obligation would be requiring the NZDF to provide results for modelling noise contours for the past levels of activity at West Melton Rifle Range, and providing regular reports on future performance against those levels. So as I said before, let's model what they've been doing over the last several years, because it's quite easy to do. And then what they've told us is that they're not going to be increasing noise levels. There's a recent newspaper report from their, I think it's Mr. Rob Owen. Yeah, it's in the Stuff 30th November newspaper report, article by Emma Dangerfield. Army person states there they're not going to be increasing activity or noise levels. So that's good, but let's put a condition then that what they could do, and it wouldn't be a big deal, they could report back on what they've done, say on a 3-monthly basis, as you would do in any normal business. They'll have the data on how many shots they've fired in the last 3 months, put it through the model, let's see. And that way, it'll actually help the neighbours with accepting what's going on there. Easy to do, reporting, quite often done in business. Why not do that? And the thing about, okay, we can't do anything because it's a designation. Actually, there's a report or advice from the RMA Quality Planning Resource 2013, entitled Plan Components, Designations, Notices of Requirements of Outline Plans. And skimming through that, it appeared that, you know, that we can put conditions in designations and we can change them. Particularly at the review process, this is what it's for, that if we actually see a need to improve well-being within the actual policies and rules of the district plan, then now's the time to do it. So I'm not a lawyer, but you know, just reading it, it seemed to be that this is what it was about. And it does make sense. Otherwise, if we've got a bad designation from the last plan, I can't believe that we can't do anything about it. It just doesn't make any sense. You know, we have to go to the environment court actually to say, hey, look, this doesn't look right. There's no conditions here, and we've got no, we don't trust what's happening. Well, they're going to say, sorry, you know, no, you can't. There's no conditions here. Bad luck. This doesn't make any sense. Anyway, but that's so that's my submission. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Halliday. Just for clarity, you've been reading from that report in your hand, is that the same thing as the presentation that you've already
Oh, yeah,
provided
yeah,
us?
it's there. It's
Okay,
actually,
so we already have that.
I apologise for not getting it to
No,
you.
thank
I
you.
actually
Just want to clarify, so we do have that already.
yes,
so thank you.
It's all.
Thank you for that. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you. I should have asked this question of the other speakers as well. As a near neighbour of the West Mountain Rifle Range, have you any issues in general with their current level of activity and noise generation? I mean, there have been exceptional events. 2009 was an exceptional event, but in general, what is the noise environment that you live in?
Right. In general, that's a really good question. In general, it's not bad. I mean, it's acceptable in terms of, we've been there for 20 years, and the rifle range, it does its thing. As I say, normally it's not bad. It's only when, as I say, now that I'm retired, no longer at work every day, when I was spending time at home, I was going, OMG, that's loud. And then I looked around and I thought, okay, it's the atmospheric condition. It's loud, it's exceptional. It's not all the time. So yeah, most of the time, the rifle range produces a noise that I wouldn't say is totally objectionable. And that was when I saw the change from the Malcolm Hunt report that had the relatively small 55 dB noise contour. Suddenly it was out towards Halkett Road. I thought, wow, there's something going to be going down here. But maybe there's not. But I think we do need to put some measures in place to actually make it that we can be happy, like the finish. We don't want to be always thinking that something's going to be happening around the corner. And I think now, when we see, for example, the range standing orders, I've never seen them. They've never been promulgated by the NZ Defence Force to the neighbours, as far as I know. Not unless it's a secret society that's been getting, but I haven't seen them in our letterbox. Nothing that's prominent or easy to see. I mean, could they be on the Selwyn District Council website, for example? It's transparency. It's not, once it's out there, it's in the public domain. Why not make it easy for people to get? Is it a secret? So yeah, I think the army, the noise is not too bad, but there's been an element of perhaps distrust that's been generated because they haven't made it easy for us to see what they're going to be doing. And then when they say we're not going to be increasing noise levels, show us. It's fine. Colonel Phil McKee, he was there in 2011. A lot of good communication. Now he's gone, and the good communication seems to have gone with him. So come back, Phil McKee.
Thank you.
Sorry, Andrew, was that to me?
Questions from you?
Thanks. Two questions for the officers before I have a couple of questions for the submitter. So to the officers, can you just remind me, please? I should recall, but I can't. So the noise contour boundaries in the notified plan, are they based on the Tonkin and Taylor report?
Yes, they are.
Yep. Okay, and can you just remind me what if any peer review process was undertaken by the council in terms of the Tonkin and Taylor report?
Yeah, my company was engaged to peer review that report at the start of 2020, and there's a letter relating to the outcomes of that review on the council file.
I think it's actually on the council website. We can put the findings of that. I think they are on the council website already, but we'll double check that.
Yeah, and can you just briefly then, just in sort of 1 or 2 sentences, the conclusions from your peer review?
Yeah, so the peer review worked through, I suppose, the major issues that you've heard about this afternoon in terms of what the inputs to the modelling were and how the modelling had been undertaken, and then I guess the entire approach in terms of the dose response, total exposure versus other approaches in terms of looking at the maximum noise levels from shots, etc. In terms of findings, the modelling, so it's been done in accordance with an ISO standard, ISO 9613, which is very typical for that type of work, and that model simulates a condition where there are inversion or light downwind conditions. So that's simulating a reasonable worst case scenario. In terms of the level of activity that was captured in the modelling, we'd asked a number of questions around that through RFIs, and there's some detail there in the TNT responses as to exactly where is happening in that modelled scenario, which they were basically referring to as a busy point in the next 10 years was their forecasted scenario. And then in terms of the overall approach, we did have some comments there that it's not an area where there is consensus and consistency in terms of how these things are approached. So the TNT approach is to look at the long-term average noise level effectively over a day-night period. We discussed in the review some other situations where the absolute noise level, so the maximum level, from a shot was used as an indicator along with the number of shots, and basically concluded that whatever approach you take, there's a number of assumptions and I guess some averaging one way or another, but we had looked, for example, at the LMAX sort of approach as an alternative, and concluded that in terms of the location of the noise control boundaries and what response you'd recommend, you would end up at a similar point. And so it'd been generally supportive that the outcome was reasonable of the work that TNT had done.
Right, thanks very much for that summary. That was helpful. So Mr. Halliday, just two questions for you. Just referring to your actual written submission in terms of changes you actually sought to the plan itself. You sought to delete noise rule 7 and to delete the West Melton Rifle Range noise control boundaries. Is that still what you're asking us to do?
Yeah, I think that what I would like to see is that the actual performance of the Army in terms of what noise they make is actually modelled. That we put the recent levels of activity, put their activity levels through the model, since it's there, shouldn't be a big deal, and then we can actually see where the lines are, what because it would be relevant to what we're talking about. Expect to see them well within the boundaries that are actually on the map. So that's what I'm after, and actually to make it good for the community to actually accept what's happening. Just get them to do it like a 3-monthly report and actually show how they're tracking. I mean, this is done quite typically. I used to work for Wholesome Cement, and they had a big cement kiln at Westport. So what they did was every 3 months, the cement works would give a report on the emissions from the stack, and it would be, people could then see it. You could go to the website of the regional council, and you could see what was going on. Why don't we just do something like that for the West Melton Rifle Range? Is it a secret what the noise they're making? It's not to the neighbours.
Yeah, just sorry, I'll interject. They're just returning to the actual question. So you're no longer seeking to delete the noise control boundaries. You're just hoping that if some remodelling was done, they might be in a different location?
No. What I'm saying is actually, I've made a recommendation to actually do something, but in terms of deleting the boundaries here, when I wrote that, I actually had just reviewed, I guess, the Tonkin and Taylor report against the Malcolm Hunt report, and I thought, this looks quite drastic in terms of the increase. What could we do about it? So I just thought, let's delete those boundaries until we understand what's going on. That was what my suggestion was. Delete the noise control boundaries that were in the Tonkin and Taylor report until we actually understood why they'd gone so far from halfway down Melton Grange Road for the 55 line out to Halkett Road. I thought, what's going on? Stop it basically until we can understand what's happening. Was this a real effect, or is it just a facet of the model? The actual change, I guess, was in the model, not in what was happening with the West Melton rifle range activity. So I guess to try to answer the question, deleting the boundaries wasn't really my objective. My objective was really to understand, what was happening with the activity and where the activity lines would be, because, to me that the change was just seemed meaningless. And you can explain it. We've got extra. I think the new modelling includes conservativeness in there, that the ISO standard says, well, we'll have like a favourable wind direction that produces more noise, and we'll allow for some inversion effects. So that explains it. But what I was after was the understanding about what's really happening and to reflect that in a modelled outcome.
Yep. Okay. Thanks very much. No further questions from me, Andrew.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Halliday, for providing us your statement today. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Okay. Right, so that means we are at Christchurch International Airport Limited's submission. Welcome to the hearing and welcome to the table. So,
Just while we have a moment, we have a copy of the last presentation. Can that be emailed out to us so that we can have a chance to look at it? There's quite a lot of information that you simply couldn't read on the screen.
The transcript of Mr. Nicol in front of me. Is that one of the ones you're looking for, Mr. Nicol? Must be a previous submitter. Just while we're getting documents circulated, we have some summaries of evidence, and we've just emailed those to your hearings officer so that Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, they may be in your inbox.
thank you for that. So, well, obviously you've appeared before this panel a few times so far, so I don't need to reiterate, I guess, the expectations. You're welcome to read from your summary statements and clarify any matters or bring points to our attention. And then we'll cover off questions after each of your speakers. If you can just introduce your team, and then we'll present over to you.
Now, what you have is evidence filed by the three witnesses and some legal submissions by me.
It does occur to me, just in dealing with the legal submissions, that other than on a couple of points which Mr. Bonis is going to cover in his evidence, where there is disagreement, there is largely alignment between the airport and the council officer, other than in relation to P3, which Mr. Bonis is going to cover, and some other minor issues around cross-referencing, etc. So with that in mind, what I was proposing to do was, unless you've got any questions on my written legal submissions, I was going to let you hear from the three witnesses, and if there was anything that needed washing up at the end, I'd do it then.
So I'll just check. Any questions on the legal submission, Councillor? No. Commissioner?
No, all good.
Okay, we're good. We'll
Right.
proceed. Thank you.
So you should have three summaries of the witnesses. We're going to start with Ms. Blackmore, then Ms. McNeil, and then Mr. Bonis. So hopefully you've got a summary of Ms. Felicity Blackmore in front of you. Cool. Cool. Oh. Sorry, did we give you two of?
Thank you. My name is Felicity Blackmore. I'm the Environment and Planning Manager in the Planning and Sustainability team at Christchurch International Airport. For this hearing, I also adopt my statement of evidence from the Strategic Directions and Energy and Infrastructure hearings. Aircraft operations create unavoidable noise that negatively impacts on amenity and comfort of people living in the proximity to runways and flight paths. The historical planning framework in Christchurch, Selwyn, and the Waimakariri has been able to minimise noise-sensitive activities locating within air noise contours, and this is demonstrated by the proportionately low number of noise complaints that CIL receives compared to other airports. It is vital that CIL continues to operate without a curfew and without restrictions as to the type or number of aircraft that can use the airport. The ability of the airport to operate 24/7 a day facilitates overnight freight movements and aircraft arrival departure of international passengers and aircraft requiring maintenance that would otherwise not be possible. Enabling the development or intensification of noise-sensitive activities, including residential activities, under the 50 dB contour would expose a large number of additional people to aircraft noise effects, which may then impact on their amenity. While there is a need to provide housing capacity and business land in the district, it should not occur in a way that allows noise-sensitive activities to establish and intensify within the noise contour, particularly if there is land available in other places across the Selwyn district, which would maintain the separation of these activities. To safeguard airport operations, it is critical that the noise contour and associated policy framework is adequately provided for and is appropriately located in the plan. Based on my experience, this would be most clear if rules related to airport noise are put into the relevant zone chapters, which is where most landowners seeking guidance from district plan rules return to. Alternatively, the zone chapters must have very clear signposting for land that falls within the noise contour. In my evidence, I provided an update on the process for remodelling the air noise contours. This exercise has commenced but is only partway through, and the contours are now with Environment Canterbury and going through an expert peer review process. Although the operative noise contours are the focus for the proposed Selwyn district plan, I'm happy to answer any questions that the panel might have on the remodelling process. CIL is committed to continuing its active role in managing reverse sensitivity effects as much as it possibly can. In our experience, proactive planning rules and clear policy direction are effective in locating incompatible activities away from each other, which is the optimal outcome for both occupiers of land and for CIAL. Thank you.
Thank you for that summary statement, and thank you also for your evidence. I'll just see if there's any questions. Commissioner Alexander.
Thank you. It's one, as your representative CIL directly, at what point are aircraft required to fly within the noise contours? The observation in this area is they're frequently flying a considerable way away from the noise contours, and they seem to only join them roughly at Templeton if they're flying from this side. What point are the noise contour, flying within the noise contours, does the flight path is it compulsory to fly within the contours, and which is an optional? Because that does make the observation, and I live in this area, is I frequently have aircraft flying over my property, and I'm considerable distance from the noise contours. So what point is it required, and what point for the aircraft is it optional?
That Ms. McNeil might be able to answer that question, but in simple terms, it's not the aircraft aren't required to fly within the noise contours. The noise contours are a model of the flight paths that go into it. So the pilots are not aware of the noise contours as they're flying along to make sure they stay within them, if that makes sense. But Ms. McNeil could probably answer that a bit better.
Yeah, because it does seem, certainly at the outer boundaries of the noise contours, seems to make them rather arbitrary, that they exist modeled on the flight path, which the pilots are not required to operate within. I mean, I'm not looking to seek a large argument, but it does seem to, a ground-based vehicle would be as if you had a motorway designation, but vehicles aren't required to drive within the motorway. It's just, particularly on the outer edges of the noise contour, it does seem that the boundary is therefore somewhat arbitrary, because it's there to protect aircraft operations, and I'm not saying I don't support that, but aircraft aren't actually obliged to fly within it, and so those properties just outside the noise contour could be subject to the same noise as those within, but without the controls of the noise contours.
Would you like that answered by Ms. McNeil now?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so the way we model them is we do put the full flight paths in that go from Christchurch to the different airports, but the contours are then basically what the noise level on the ground is. So you can imagine that the 65 LDN contour is very small, and then the 55 is slightly larger, and the 50 is larger than that. You could extrapolate your noise contours out to 20 dB, and it would cover a larger area. So it's not that the flight paths aren't modeled, it's just that the noise effects to a certain noise level only extend out so far, if that makes sense. And beyond that, aircraft are still flying, but the effects of that flight are not seen to be adverse. So we don't need noise contours to control in that area, if that makes sense.
Thank you, it does. And I guess my secondary question on that is, with your modelling, you can come to it in your evidence, is how do you make an allowance for the fact that each new generation of aircraft appears to get quieter, while we've got to cater for existing aircraft? Each new generation appears, as its design feature is a quieter profile. But you perhaps come to that when you come to your evidence.
I can answer it quickly now if you want, but yeah, aircraft noise has decreased over time due to advancements in engine technology, mainly the turbofan aircraft. So it has, but it's kind of starting to plateau out now as that technology has been advanced to a certain degree. So the new generation of aircraft coming out aren't any quieter than sort of the ones that are flying now that are relatively modern, is our findings from analysis.
Thank you.
Commissioner Solomon, any questions? We'll come. Yeah, this one. Yeah. Commissioner Van Voorsthuizen, any comments or questions rather?
Yeah, Mr. Blackmore, just in terms of your circulated evidence, and in your Appendix A, you had the green and the blue contours. I know that's not the subject of the hearing before us because the independent panel's yet to look at that. But which of those does the airport prefer, the blue or the green, just out of interest?
We don't have a preference. I guess that's why we put those two options forward, and it's recognizing that there's different modeling methodologies that you can apply, and they have different outcomes. So it's more of a question for the experts on which modeling methodology best reflects the noise environment that is received.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. No more questions for Mr. Blackmore?
No, not for me.
Laura.
Should I start with mine? My name is Laura McNeil. I'm an acoustic consultant at Marshall Day Acoustics. I understand that provisions relating to aircraft noise and land use planning may be spread across the proposed plan. My evidence filed for the noise chapter provides the acoustic rationale and justification for the suite of provisions sought by Christchurch Airport to manage land use within the 50 dB LDN air noise contour. Relief sought by CIAL. I understand that CIAL's primary relief in the noise chapter and more broadly across the proposed plan involves rules which are aimed at avoiding noise sensitive activities and maintaining rural site densities inside the 50 dB LDN air noise contour, with additional mitigation required inside the 55 dB LDN air noise contour. To summarize my evidence, density controls and a rule framework which avoids noise sensitive activities is appropriate for land within the 50 dB LDN air noise contour. If there is other land available to direct noise sensitive land use, it is better to establish those activities in areas where occupants will not be exposed to aircraft noise. Noise mitigation standards are also proposed for new buildings that are allowed to be built within the 55 dB LDN air noise contour. I agree that those standards are appropriate, and I'm comfortable with the additions sought by Canterbury District Health Board, providing greater detail around mechanical ventilation standards. I consider the proposed plan's definition of noise sensitive activity covers all relevant categories listed in NZS 6005. I understand that CIAL has requested additional text in the definition related to visitor accommodation. I agree with the rationale that although visitor accommodation activity is noise sensitive, occupants may be less affected by the unsatisfactory noise environment if their stay is transient, and if staying at an airport hotel, for example, they may not have the same expectations of a quiet environment. Though this is more of an issue in the Christchurch district, arising historically around accommodations such as the Sedema or Commodore hotels. I observed that visitor accommodation in buildings not meeting appropriate internal design levels and accommodation where a high level of amenity would be expected by guests, or accommodation providing long-term stays would be sensitive to noise. Noise boundaries and land use controls in Canterbury. Canterbury has historically used 3 noise contours to set land use planning rules for aircraft noise: the air noise boundary, the 55 dB LDN air noise contour, and the 50 dB LDN air noise contour. The 55 and 50 contours extend into the Selwyn district. Those contours are modelled and represent future levels of aircraft noise when the airport is operating at capacity. The councils in Canterbury have historically maintained predominantly rural zoning and restrictions on noise sensitive activities within the 50 dB LDN air noise contour, which has proved to be an effective way to plan land use. Many other New Zealand airports have not been as fortunate and are required to operate with restrictions to manage noise effects on residential areas and other sensitive land uses that have been allowed to establish close to the airport. Community response to noise. There is no hard and fast cutoff threshold at which noise effects from airport operations are felt. However, national and international research confirms that there are adverse effects on communities from aircraft noise at levels of 50 dB LDN. As outlined in my evidence, most of the latest research also demonstrates an increase in levels of annoyance among populations living around airports. The Christchurch specific data and the latest overseas data confirms that areas receiving noise levels greater than 50 dB LDN do not provide a sensible location for new noise sensitive development if it can easily be located elsewhere. The 50 dB LDN noise contour therefore provides a suitable onset for planning controls in Selwyn. Sound mitigation. As I have discussed in my brief of evidence, sound mitigation is a fallback measure. It is preferable to avoid the effects of airport noise ahead of mitigation. The level of sound insulation required in the 50 to 55 LDN area is provided by a standard house. Even though this achieves WHO's satisfactory noise levels, research demonstrates that there is still a proportion of the population that will be highly annoyed. Houses allowed to establish within the 50 to 55 dB LDN area and fitted with insulation in areas at 55 dB LDN and above will need to operate with their windows closed to reduce internal noise levels. This can result in unsatisfactory levels of fresh air, installation of a ventilation system at significant cost, or windows being left open. All of these scenarios are likely to result in complaints. Sound insulation does not deal with the outdoor noise environment, and New Zealand generally enjoys an outdoor type of lifestyle, particularly in rural areas. In conclusion, I consider the package of planning rules which avoids noise-sensitive activities in the 50 dB LD and air noise contour and requires sound mitigation for new buildings within the 55 dB LD and air noise contour is appropriate from an acoustics perspective.
And now, just before you answer any questions, I'm just wondering, just some further clarification on the question that was asked. Can I just ask you to look at paragraph 5 of your summary, and you referred to the 3 contours, the air noise boundary, the 55 and the 50. The air noise boundary isn't in Christchurch, but I was wondering if you could help the Commissioner with his question about there's not much point having a motorway if they're not going to drive on the motorway, and what the role of the air noise boundary is in terms of compliance.
Do you mean the SER 95?
No, the 65.
Oh, the 65.
Compliance contour.
Yes. Yeah. So obviously the noise contours that are published in the district plan are for future. So that's when the airport is running at capacity. Every year compliance contours are also calculated to measure how we're tracking at the moment in terms of the aircraft operations that are happening now. And those operations are put in a noise model, and we also measure the noise levels on the ground to see whether the noise contours and noise levels are within that air noise boundary. So that's just a check on whether we're complying each year, and as the years go on and movements become larger, the contours get closer and closer to that future noise contour. So I'm not sure that's helpful.
Yeah, and just to your point about what's the point if they don't ride on the motorway, the air noise boundary, there's a rule in the district plan in the city, Christchurch City, which is a compliance contour. So if noise isn't where we say it is and we bust that compliance contour in the city, we're going to have a problem.
Yeah.
So that's how we ensure that the noise is going to be where the noise is we predict it. So that compliance contour is in the Christchurch City, although the noise effects are felt in Selwyn.
Questions?
No further questions, and thank you for the clarification. The motorway metaphor was a little bit tongue in cheek.
If they're not flying where they're meant to fly, we're going to have a problem. We'll have a compliance problem because our modelling will be wrong. So
Yeah,
we'll
exactly.
trigger a and I don't really want to have to consent to the airport as a non-complying activity when we bust the compliance contour.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Selwyn?
Paragraph 29.
29, with regard to the development of NZS 6805,
Yes.
where you note consultation occurred with many different groups and organisations, experts and residential action groups.
Yeah.
Do you know if Māori were consulted when the standard was being developed in respect of marae and kohanga reo?
I'm not sure, sorry, that's I wasn't around when that
Back in
process
the
was happening.
1990s,
Yeah, but
yeah.
I understand they did engage with many stakeholders, so they may have been part of that process.
And at your paragraph 78, 79 and 80, where you give examples from Auckland, Sydney and Boston,
Yes.
where residential developed have established outside of these contours, but where most of the complaints came from. Do you know what the nature of those complaints were? Because it might suggest that perhaps the contours need to be extended.
So for the Auckland one, I can talk to in a bit of detail because I worked on that job. But yeah, the complaints were about new flight paths that were implemented, which was slightly different to the original flight paths, but the noise level difference wasn't significant. But so I think people were maybe reacting to the fact that there were new flight paths over their houses rather than any major difference in noise levels. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rob?
No, thank you very much, Ms. McNeil, for your evidence, but no questions or clarification from me. Thank you.
Thank you.
And no questions of clarification from me either. Thank you. Thank you,
Cool.
Ms.
Thank you
McNeil.
very much.
Good afternoon, panel. Just got a minor but reasonably important errata in terms of the summary that was circulated to you this morning. If I can turn your attention to the top of page 2, and if you could grab a pen and just strike out "of Felicity Blackmore," because clearly this is a summary. You've already heard from Ms. Blackmore. It's not my finest hour in front of this panel, I must admit. The rest of it's quite cogent and coherent, I hope. Essentially, I'll take 1 to 5 as largely read. It's essentially a reiteration of my evidence in chief and just confirming compliance with the code, my understanding of the airport, strategic importance, and the sort of statutory framework. 5, I think, is important because it essentially says that there's not substantial light between myself and Ms. Barker in terms of the Section 42A report, in terms of the noise proposal. There's really a few sort of minor matters, I guess, of polishing or clarity. P3 very much comes into that compartment, but I'll just quickly go through 6, just so for the record effectively. I confirm agreement between myself and Ms. Barker as to the following. Noise objective 1, as amended to a more appropriate qualifier than significant and linked to anticipated outcomes. And that provides, I think Ms. Barker and I both agree, an appropriate nexus to both the zone standards, which obviously reflect different noise expectations, and also the provisions of the noise control overlays themselves. At noise 02, there's no change. So I'll put a submission on that in terms of making it very explicit about the avoidance of noise sensitive activities. Ms. Barker has recommended refusal of that, and I ultimately agree with that. But on the basis of my evidence in front of this panel on strategic directions and also energy and infrastructure, it's not that such a provision isn't necessary. I think it very much is, but I think it's more important than one of those district-wide proposals. At noise policy P3B, is amended to mitigation rather than insulation, and Ms. McNeil, I think, has covered off the sort of ventilations, not mitigation per se. At noise R4, there's a number of matters that I think we have agreement on. One is the nomenclature of air noise contour is Airport 55 dBA LDN noise control overlay. Simply contours isn't available to the council in terms of the national planning standards. The title and also the ventilation standards, and the latter has been outlined by Ms. McNeil as being the more appropriate. The definition of noise sensitive activity and providing a more succinct yet workable definition. At mapping, identification and labelling of both the 50 and 55 LDN noise control overlays. And amendment to rule, subdivision rule, and I've provided commentary in my evidence of 52 to 55. But essentially, I understand the recommendation from the 42A reporting officer removes the ability for sort of clustering under the 50 dBA noise contour. Effectively, any residential unit on an allotment of less than 4 hectares is deemed non-complying, and I believe that's appropriate. I've noted, however, there's some residual concerns as to any residential efficacy and efficiency, I guess, of subdivision rule R26. It's a matter I'll come back to this panel on, hopefully under the subdivision proposal. I'm able to answer any commentary on it, but effectively applying the rule removing clustering under R11 for all important infrastructure sort of brings into question the efficacy of sub 26 altogether. Further submissions as to exempting helicopters and aircraft in supporting of amending the LAEQ parameter, and also no evidential support for application of blanket non-notification clauses. So I agree with the 42A reporting officer on all of those matters. Lastly, in terms of CIL's further submissions, I support the 42A recommendation in terms of the rejection of the 4-star deferred zoning under the operative RPS 50 dBA LDN contour and proposed noise control overlay at Rolleston. That's plan change 71. I've also noted as Ms. Blackmore that any remodelling process for the air noise contours is some way off, being both certain and also implemented in terms of the higher order framework. So in terms of matters where there remain disagreement, they are very limited, but it's effectively noise policy 3A. And essentially, I think the difference, and I've looked at Ms. Barker's response to the panel dated 2nd of February. There's a bit of clarity missing in terms of what I think that policy is supposed to be achieving. At the moment, it appears to be drafted in terms of just the avoidance of residential units on sites of less than 4 hectares under the 50 dBA contours, which in my view leaves a gap and doesn't really follow through in terms of RPS policy 6354, in terms of the avoidance of all noise sensitive activities under the 50 dBA contour. And it also contrasts, I guess, with noise policy 4, which is the one in relation to the port, which is very clear as to the avoidance of noise sensitive activities with under the contour. So I've seen the panel's questions and the responses, and I guess with respect to the 42A reporting officer, I disagree. And I still think that the wording that I've provided is probably the more appropriate. Well, is the more appropriate. It essentially breaks the provision into 2 limbs at A as to the avoidance of noise sensitive activities within the 50 dBA. And the second limb of A is the residential units, which are also defined as noise sensitive activities, but there's not great clarity to that unless you start sort of climbing through the architecture of the definitions. And the last one is agreement with Ms. Barker in terms of noise mitigation for noise sensitive activities under the 55. I've also looked at the commentary as to should exceedance or exceeded density be the more appropriate phraseology in terms of the policy. The concern that I have with that is exceeded density imbues a sense of averaging or clustering. And I talked through the sort of subdivision amendment recommended earlier by Ms. Barker, and I agree with that. But when you're starting to look at sort of exceeding a density, in my view as a planner, it's less certain than simply saying on its face less than 4 hectares. So that's why I've recommended that approach. At 7.2, in terms of cross-referencing, as outlined in my evidence in chief, given the breadth by which the 50 dBA LDN contours extend to land use and not solely for noise matters, provides some justification, in my view, for these provisions being located within the zone chapters. And I understand the CIL submission is littered with potential opportunities by which provisions could be moved to more appropriate zones. And I certainly understand that, especially in terms of the airport, where the overlays, the noise control overlay is predominant or is purely over the general rural zone. It's not the same for all important infrastructure. And in that light, and wearing a planning hat, I can understand why the plan is set out the way that it is. And there's also some structural integrity in terms of the way that the plan sets out R3 through to R8 in terms of all the overlays for important infrastructure. So I guess my view is I understand why the council's done that, and I agree with it. However, I do think that there is certainly room for greater cross-referencing within the zone standards to the other provisions that are within the plan, especially the general matters. And lastly, at 7.3, there's minor amendments I've suggested to the noise overview, removing reference to New Zealand standards, as I do not understand these without inclusion in a district plan or NES control noise emissions themselves. So thank you for that. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you for your summary statement, setting that out. I'll just see if there's any questions. Commissioner Alexander, Commissioner Solomon, Commissioner Van Voorsthuizen, questions?
Mr. Bonus, is refreshing to read your evidence, and unlike the situation in Ukraine at the moment, it was quite pleasing to see that peace is largely broken out in this particular arena.
I'll walk back from the border then, sir.
Yeah, I certainly understand the points you're making about policy P3 and the need to have sensitive activities in general covered, with the residential issue being a subset of that. And I imagine we'll hear from the officers again about that in reply. Also take your point about cross-referencing, appreciate your acknowledgement of the architecture of the plan. I think the issue is cross-referencing is something we'll need to look at sometime next year when we come to look at all of our recommendation reports and how the whole plan gels as a whole. So we'll keep that in mind for sure. But other than that, no questions of clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Just a couple from me. Paragraph 34.4 of your evidence in chief. I just want to clarify the final wording in your suggested amendments. I think you mean subject to additional controls, and I think you also mean to leave in RMA, not strike through.
Yes, correct, sir.
Thank you. No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure we have that correct on record. So let's have a look. So yeah, so just looking, I know that in the section footage away report, the officer talks about the relationship between paragraph A and B. So this is your evidence, paragraph 50. And in the footage away report, it talks about how A appears to be more stringent than B, when I guess sensibly you'd think it would be the other way around. So avoid in the 50 and require noise insulation within the 55. And I'm just wondering whether you had a comment on that observation in the section footage away report.
Sorry, sir, I don't have the section 42A report in front of me.
Yeah, it's para 14.8 in the footage away report. It's just simply saying that it's the reworded as you proposed. We have a more clearly, or more obviously, a higher threshold in a 50 dB noise contour than in a 55 dB noise contour. And I appreciate that that's probably driven by a higher order policy framework. But I just wondered whether you had a comment on that observation.
Yeah, what it comes down to, sir, yes. What it comes down to, sir, is that there is acceptance by the airport that a rural density down to 4 hectares is aligned with how the RPS delineates between noise sensitive activities and rural activities, or in fact, residential and rural. So it is recognised that within the 50 dBA contour, you will at times get subdivision where a residential unit could be put in place in relation to a compliant rural allotment of greater than 4 hectares. In those instances where the residential unit is located within the 55 dBA contour, as set out in the evidence of Ms. McNeil, there is the necessity for insulation and ventilation requirements to ensure that habitable rooms are achieving an appropriate level of acoustic attenuation. So that's why there is that criteria in terms of how those provisions are set. Your first instance is to avoid noise sensitive activities anywhere within the 50 dBA contour. Mm-hmm. And then as Ms. McNeil set out within the 55, it is appropriate to recognise where they're not noise sensitive activities, i.e. they're still a residential unit, but within a compliant 4 hectare development, that noise mitigation will actually be required.
So you're applying a hierarchy between A and B. Okay. So your comments through your evidence around, and your reference again to P3, you've commented on the section footage officer's response, and you've said it's not just residential activities, it's all noise sensitive activities or including residential units on lots less than. And I appreciate you've referred to the RPS to say, well, it's broader than just simply residential activities, and hence why we're seeking that. I'm just wondering whether you had a view on whether it could simply just be noise sensitive activities on lots less than 4 hectares, full stop. So it would also capture travellers accommodation, education activities, any sort of urban density development on lots less than 4 hectares.
The issue may be you may end up with an educational facility, for example, going on a lot greater than 4 hectares, and it's still defined as a noise sensitive activity within both the RPS and also within table 1 and 2 of NZS 6805. So even though it would comply with the 4 hectare and the hypothesis you're putting forward towards me, it would still be compliant in terms of that policy level, but it would be a noise sensitive activity in terms of the RPS and the way that 6805 would wish to treat that activity.
Yeah, but just looking at the way you've crafted A, it seems to be any noise sensitive activity in the 50 dBA, and then residential activities on lots less than 4 hectares.
I've used the link including.
So it would be, does that mean that it's a traveller's accommodation on a lot less than 4 hectares and an education activity on a lot less than 4 hectares? It doesn't.
No, that would stand alone under,
so it's
under
a test.
AI.
So is it a higher test for travellers accommodation and education on any size lot, but only residential on lots less than 4 hectares? And is that what you're seeking?
Aligned with the RPS.
And that's what you're seeking?
Yeah.
A higher threshold for those other activities in the residential?
Well, I think it treats them the same. It essentially treats residential units on lots that are less than 4 hectares the same way it would treat travellers accommodation and places of education.
Okay.
The reality is your average residential unit might have, we had this discussion before the HRHP, you might get some very large houses with 8 bedrooms, but your accommodation could be 400. So we've just been practical that your average residential unit is going to get to a point where one kitchen is going to flick into 2 kitchens and it's going to be something else. So it's just to avoid that. It might be less than 4 hectares, but it might have 400 bedrooms in it, which, you know, then we have the density problem.
Sure. All right. Thank you. No further questions.
Yeah.
So thank you for, if you're finished, thank you for your presentation of your submissions and summary statements today. Thank you.
I was just going to pick up on that, just one point, and I'm sure you've picked it up just back on P3, the requiring mitigation, the insulation within the 55. So the 55 contour sits inside the 50. So everything within 50, so your numbers up, are included in the density requirements. And before the insulation B, we've got an and. So the insulation is and, not instead of. So you get density for everything 50, 55, 65 and above. So that's like a circle, 50, 55, 65. So if you're in the 55, A and B apply, not A or B.
Yeah, so it's cumulative, basically.
Yeah, which is
yeah.
the and sits a little bit. I just wondered whether it should be at the start of the B, but it is on the end of the A.
Yeah, no, thank you for clarifying that. Appreciate it. Okay. So that concludes the presentations for the day, our statements of evidence, and I think we will adjourn the hearing now and then reconvene at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Thank you.